Hello and welcome back to the Scottish Games Network YouTube channel and podcast. As always, we're your hosts. I'm Ryan, not Brian. That one's Brian.
I'm Brian, and so is my Ryan.
Yes, that's professionalism at its finest. And today we're joined by a very special guest. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm Marina Díez. I am the CEO at Three of Cups Games, an ethical and diverse games studio based in London. And besides, I also work as the lead designer for Dordogne, the upcoming game from Je ne sais quoi studios in France. And I also work as a game designer at Wondershop in Finland.
Yeah. Having checked out your LinkedIn page and your bio, you don't seem to have a lot of spare time, Marina. That's an awful lot of hats for anyone to wear.
Yeah, it's been very intense. The good thing is that not all the projects are all the time on. Some of them are going on and off. Like, for example, with Je ne sais quoi, we finished recently our demo. And then now we are waiting for a couple of months. So that's how I find relief in my timings. And then, but yeah, like in Three of Cups games, actually at the moment we are taking a break because I was having difficult times through burnout because I like wearing many hats. I love doing many stuff. I love getting involved with the games community everywhere, and that's obviously impossible. Sometimes it has some limit, and I kind of reached mine last year, so I'm kind of recovering from that. And then Wondershop is kind of like my full-time job at the moment, where I'm putting more energies now that we are making amazing games there too as well. So yeah, it's not easy, and I'm, as the lead of an ethical games studio, it's kind of like you also need to play with your example to show people that crunch is not okay and that unethical work is not okay. But it's super difficult because in my case, it's just that I really love this industry and what we do here and working with everyone and talking to everyone. So for me, it's super difficult to get some spare time far from our industry.
Yeah, well, when you're clearly so passionate about what you do and you're clearly so driven by it, I guess it can be difficult to tear yourself away. But tell me more about an ethical games company, because obviously this is an issue that's existed more or less from the earliest days of the industry. So how do you position yourself as an ethical games company? What is it that you hope to achieve?
Basically, at the moment, it's been not super easy because, first of all, we have in the industry the burden of funds in indie development. So that's another hat that I need to wear as well in the business side. That's the first thing that is very complicated for ethical and diverse games studios, to find all the money you need to carry on with your project. But besides that, also the idea came out from my experience looking for a job in the industry when I finished my master's at Brunel University London in 2019. And I was basically desperate finding a job in London. I was trying to find a place where I could stay and at the same time that allowed me to stay in the UK because I come from Spain. So, my money had a limit and I was reaching that limit. And was trying to find that, and I got super tired of all the responses that I received from big and small games studios. Sometimes the small studios were very lovely, but they didn't have enough money in the end. Or big studios, I always tell this story, but some occasions they just didn't hire me because they didn't make emotional games. So, but that's something that I've been also approaching a lot on my personal account on Twitter, that for me, from my perspective, it's very silly to say as a game developer that you don't make emotional games because all the artistic and cultural experiences are about emotions, about passion and feeling something, at least, whatever you feel like. So that was very silly. And obviously I was very lucky that I found a place that it was not as a game designer. It was as an operations coordinator at Gameset, a lovely charity in the UK, but it was not game design. So I stayed there for a year. And in the meantime, I was thinking that probably lots of other people that came from marginalized backgrounds were as well very tired of these situations in the industry. And when they were in need to find a job, So that's how Three of Cups was born, that I thought that I wanted to start a place where I could feel safe, the kind of like in my career, where I could grow and make other people grow. And at the same time, I was reflecting a lot on how work experiences have shaped myself and my mental health and everything. So I wanted to kind of like being the good experience for people joining my studio. So that's why I created Three of Cups, because I wanted to start a trend in the games industry for games studios to see that making ethical games and having ethical work environments was possible. And you know, in many ways we are doing super well with that. Like as I said earlier, the only problem that we normally have is that it's super difficult to try to make the game and at the same time fighting for finding funds, because you know, like we don't have many funds in the games industry for funding prototypes per se. So like the kind of like everyone pretends you to make something for free, and then if you're lucky you get the funds, and I think that's very unethical as well.
Going back to what you were saying about crunch, how do you avoid that? Because of course, you know, as you get closer to a deadline of any project, you tend to find that you have to ramp up your workflow to make sure that you meet it. So what do you do as a studio? Like, what processes do you put in place to stop that from being as difficult for your employees?
Basically, I'm from the opinion that that I think that crunch comes from bad time management from production side, but not only from production, because I think it's not good to leave all the guilt to just one department in the games studios, but from many times from management itself, that, you know, like producers also do whatever they can do for making the project goes well, but sometimes management starts like, oh, we need to finish this earlier, so what production can do anything about that. And then I'm learning a whole lot on how to be ethical and not crunch with the studio where I'm working at in Helsinki, Wondershop, because like, for example, there we work 4 days per week, some of us, and 3 days per week, and it's a very good ethics on people that, for example, need to take maternity leave and paternity leaves, and that kind of stuff is fantastic. And you know, like if you treat people well, and if people feel good and they're happy and they have quality time outside of work with their families, they come back to work and they are able to do stuff in less amount of time because they are motivated. But if we keep carrying with the idea of having people working for 10 hours per day, 12 hours per day, in Spain it's also a pretty common practice to be at work the max you can until you are super exhausted. If we carry that, obviously I think the products that we are going to ship to the market are not going to be as optimal as they could be. And we saw that recently with Cyberpunk as well. It's a very good example on how the poor developers have been crunching massively. For then what? What was the result? Nothing. Just like a game that could be amazing, but it was just regular or bad because of poor management and unethical work.
You know, this might be a bit of a heavy question here, but you mentioned maternity leave there, and that being sort of associated with crunch. Have you found that in the industry there's people who want to have children that potentially decide to put that in the back burner because they can't with their career? Is that something that's honestly common in the industry?
I think that I never talked about this openly with other friends and peeps from the games industry, but if I'm pretty sure there are some people that feel like that. Like myself, 2 years ago, I was so into trying to make myself a name in the games industry and show my work and all that stuff, that I thought that was the main thing that I needed to do. So that's also how I end being burned out, is because as a marginalized person in the games industry, you need to kind of work the double to show that you are worth. And obviously you think that everything else apart from your job is less important, because also it's something you need to live or to help out your family, or that kind of stuff. So I I would believe that it's people out there thinking on not having kids because they want to carry on with their careers, because it's difficult to kind of like, being 100% with both of the things.
If I can ask, Marina, it's one thing being an ethical games company in terms of your business practice, in terms of your team, your employee, and your work ethic. But I'd like to sort of take a quick look at the content and the games that you're producing, because you clearly have a very strong focus on creating games that I would say are still outside the mainstream, that are focused on emotions, but without the usual games industry tropes of horror, fear, and bloodlust. So how did you come? Was this something that has interested you from the very beginning, before getting into the industry, or is this something that's been developing for you?
Basically, it's a very good question. Basically, my main, like the company that I admire the most in the games industry is True Love, founded by Bricode, and I really love the kind of games they make. I think that's a revolution, and in some way that's how I got inspired to start making my way on through emotional games, because when they released Self-Care, I saw that there was a potential for the kind of games that I love to make, because at the beginning, obviously, when I started in the games industry, I started making games around mental health and self-care myself, but I thought that was going to be only a thing that I could make as a hobby, never as a way of living. So, but then when I saw Rico making these wonderful experiences, I saw that there was a possibility out there, and a niche and a market and a demand as well. So and then after when I started, I also noticed that there was this need on kind of a different kind of games, because I made this game called Hey Dad. It was a game about my dad's bipolar disorder, and there was a game that surprisingly everyone liked, and I just made that game for me to kind of process better how I felt as a kid with my dad's sickness. But then I found out when I released that game that many people felt as well very identified with the story that I was telling.
Yeah.
So that inspired me a whole lot to keep going with making these kind of experiences, because I thought that many people just playing this feel less lonely and with their own living experiences. So that's how I got inspired.
That's fantastic. And when if people visit your itch.io page, and we'll share the link in the Scottish Games website, there's a lot of content there. You know, you're clearly not just working. This is something that you're pursuing with a passion. And to go back to your original point in terms of, the industry expectation and burnout and trying to establish a reputation, when do you feel that you will have done enough? When do you feel that you'll have arrived? Because to me, visiting that page, that's a catalogue that an experience, a developer with 10 years more experience would be proud of.
Basically, it's very difficult, because to be super honest with you, until I keep feeling like that, but I'm a person that kind of finds that their own value through the work they make. So I feel that the better things that I make, the better I am as a person. And obviously it's something that I'm working on it, because, everyone is worth independently of the kind of job they have or what do they do. But besides that, it's also a matter that I started making lots of games, because I read up that there was this say in the games industry that your first 10 games were going to be shit. And after that, you're going to start making amazing games. And in some way, it's really true. So that I started making my 10 shitty games as soon as I could. So, and besides that as well, it's kind of I really feel kind of very alive when I make these experiences and I share them with other people, and I see them feeling excited as well about my ideas, because I think the 90% of the games that I make are stuff that I come up with from my life experiences. So, that's why I always have a topic, because all comes out from my own feelings and my story. So yeah, but I also like, well, the last year I didn't make as many games as I made in the like before the pandemic, but obviously I gave myself kind of a pause because, you know, like with the situation it's difficult to cope with everything.
And to touch on, you know, one of the games that you've been working on, you mentioned earlier, was Dordogne, with Je ne sais quoi games, which is a studio in France.
Bordeaux, yeah.
In Bordeaux, and it's exquisite. It's beautiful. It's a child's watercolor cartoon brought to life, and it really seems to fit into this whole idea of wholesome games. You know, so they're not combative or competitive. It's much more about creating a serene and tranquil environment. So can you talk about that title at all?
So as you said, it's true that Dordogne is another tiny piece in the indie scene for making wholesome games. And honestly, I'm very proud of that project. I've been working with Je ne sais quoi since late 2019. And the beginning was difficult because, again, it was a project that didn't have funds at the beginning. So, we needed to work on that for free first and then to find the funds later. But the thing is that I think Dordogne gave me the opportunity to practice all, in terms of game design, what I had in my head my whole life, and to kind of like experiment with my way of making games. And I also wrote an article last September on how to find your voice in the games industry as whatever you do, because Dordogne gave me that thing, that I could experiment with how I made games and that I could find my own voice. And that's how I figured out that my best way of making games was not in the traditional way that other game designers normally talk about, but that all of us, we have tricks for finding the spark in what we create. So I'm super proud of Dordogne, and I really hope that it's shipped by the end of this year.
Fantastic. And again, we'll provide links to everything that we're talking about this afternoon. So coming on to emotion in games and empathy, you're taking part in the Play Away Festival in the next few days, talking specifically about emotional games. And how do you see the industry moving? Are we becoming more comfortable with the idea of emotional games? Do you get more designers and developers kind of interested in taking their games into this kind of area, or introducing more emotions into them?
Honestly, I think yes. I think that more people are kind of realizing that emotions are important. The problem that I find is that many times emotional keeps having bad connotations, because like also very misogynistic ones. Like many times we say that a woman is emotional in a bad way, like she's not able to cope with her duties or her job because she is emotional. And that's something that emotions keep carrying right in the society. But I think that we are kind of realizing that emotions are not that, and that they are important, and that we all of us, we have emotions. And I think more developers are gonna see that emotions are basically like the core of a game that you make. Whatever you're making, it doesn't matter. And in the last couple of years, I saw very good examples of that. Like, for example, the last year I was playing Death Stranding, and I think it was like, I really love how Hideo Kojima makes games, because for me those games are super emotional and very shocking many times. Like Metal Gear Solid, for example, was a big shock for me. Like it was wonderful to see how the effects of war in people and PTSD and that kind of things. And I think that many players are not kind of aware of that if you're not very into, like I really love like all around psychology and emotions and stuff, because that's what I do as a game developer. But if you are not very into that world, I think that these kind of games are just another, another game that you don't stop to think, oh, like this like Hideo Kojima is here using emotions to make me feel shocked about this. So like that, and also other games like Fumito Ueda's Last Guardian is another very good example on using emotions in game development. And yeah, so I think that many people are realizing these days that emotions are cool. And also, like, with the volume of job that I've been having in the last year, unexpectedly, I think that, yeah, like, more people are requesting my skills as an emotional game designer. I think it's also a positive thing that I realized that there is also something for me to do in this industry as an alternative kind of game designer.
For any designers listening, what approach do you take when you're approaching a new project compared to developers who potentially don't make as emotional titles?
Basically, I don't know if this is the trend on all the studios or if it's something that I do because it works for me. But like, for example, when we started Dordogne, it was just like an idea that the creative director had and a couple of references, but really nothing, on stone. And the first thing that I did there was to create a kind of like a mood board with, like lots of audiovisual materials, not only games, but also films. We work a lot on concepts that were used on Studio Ghibli. We work a lot on books, like, for example, Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan. Those were references that we used to build the characters, like all of that stuff. And that's, I make playlists on Spotify to set up the mood of the project. And, I love all, like, culture a lot. So I always use lots of things from theater, from cinema, from music, from everything that it falls in my hands that I think is going to be useful, could be a good reference for me. Like, I guess that this is something that maybe other studios do as well, but I always focus a lot on the emotional side of all of these. And I tend to also look for lots of GIFs where I can see movements and, like, things coming alive. And yeah, so another thing that I do as well is, like, in my own projects, not when I'm working on a studio with other people, is that I directly open Unity and I start placing elements. That's what I really love to do on my personal things. And I start experimenting and placing objects here, there, music, cameras, lights, and that's how I figure out things depending on what I want people to feel. So I start with an emotion, like, for example, anxiety or sadness or happiness, and then I start placing I start building everything around. So I think, oh, the player is gonna feel like this if I put this stuff here or there.
I've recently been playing Nier Automata, and I've spoken a wee bit in my free time about how I really love the area titled City Ruins, and there's a track that goes with it that's named after the area, and I feel like that sells the idea of the area. Like, essentially, it's a city that's fallen, and like, nature starts to reclaim it, and it's both, like, beautiful and quite haunting. And I think the music serves to sort of drill that emotion home and sort of, like, it hits the player. How closely do you work with composers and people that make music and games to sell the emotion that you want the player to experience?
Since minute zero. So I think that we should get on board everyone, like, at the very first time. I don't think that everyone is making a mistake, but personally I think it's a mistake to get on board all the professionals later on and discover that your game doesn't work at all. And it happens a lot, and it's not only with composers. It happens, like, for example, vital departments like QA or marketing, that they always come, they've been coming on the projects, like, in the last minute, and that's a mistake. Because, for example, in Wondershop we work closely with marketing people, and it's been super useful to have them since the very beginning, like, because, like, marketing, for example, it's essentially engagement, and we want engagement in our games. Like, how otherwise are we gonna make players to play our games if we don't know nothing about the engagement? So I think it's also a matter that developers, we should be more open to listen other people. And there is a thing that it's like the pride of being the creator. And I also live that because we are all human, right? Like when someone comes to you with bad feedback or saying like, oh, I think that this is maybe not the best idea, you feel pride and it's like, oh, like my idea is the best. But you need to kind of overcome that feeling and say, okay, I'm going to listen to everyone, and then we decide what do we do. But it's very important to kind of have a humble approach to the project you're making and to get everyone on board since the beginning. So in the case of composers, like that was your initial question, absolutely. Like, for example, in Three of Cups games, we have an amazing audio designer. And besides that, she's one of my best friends, but as a, in the professional field, we've been working since the very beginning together to set up the mood of the project, because like how otherwise are we gonna know what we are making if we don't have on board or composers or people that are expert with the cameras or lights? It's impossible.
I really like your approach in terms of your inspiration and drawing from outside video games, because again, the mainstream part of the industry can feel so self-referential. It's the big franchises, the same experience, the same genres, and being able to pull in inspiration and draw inspiration from other parts of culture and the creative world is incredibly important. And as a writer, my first job in games was as a writer / narrative designer. I was too used to being brought in towards the end of a project. So it's like, okay, we've made all of the things that we think are fun, now figure out why. And so bringing people together from the outset allows you, as you say, everybody has something to bring, everyone has something to add. And if you're all working independently and then trying to mash it together at the last minute, you're giving yourself serious problems. So I'm finding it incredibly inspiring to hear that you're out there and producing so much content and that you're getting that kind of industry interest. So to me, it shows a certain maybe level of maturity that the game sector's been missing for a while.
Yeah, I think that it's, as you said, is pretty important. And you, for example, you post the example of your job as a writer, and I was precisely thinking of that Dordogne started getting the best shape when we got on board Anthony, that it's our narrative designer or writer. He's been just amazing on helping us to shape the whole game. And I'm a game designer and I know a little bit of narrative because I'm also like an Italian and German philology, so I read a lot of books, and I also love writing myself, but I'm not an expert. So that's why I said that we should have a humble approach, because I love, for example, the role of creative director, but even if you are Hideo Kojima, you are not you are not a god here, and everyone has something to say, and as you said, something to contribute with. So yeah, I think it's really important to bring everyone together and listen everyone.
See, now that's interesting, Marina, because this is a discussion I have with a lot of friends out with the game sector. So I do some lecturing, I do quite a lot of work with people in the stream sector, and one of the biggest, well, maybe not an issue, one of the biggest differences between games and other areas of the creative industry is that we don't necessarily have the same creative vision keeper as they do in other areas. So stage, live performance, you've got the director. In film, you have the director, and the director is the creative vision keeper and the sort of creative lead for an entire team. But in games, it's so much more fluid. So the creative vision keeper can be the lead designer, or it can be the team leads. It's in some cases it's the producer, or maybe even rarely the narrative designer. And so, have you had any experience or much experience with other areas of the creative industries in terms of developing and creating content?
Basically, that I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I have the feeling that, for example, we have many things in common with obviously with cinema, in terms of talking about the indie development. In terms of I feel that our kind of processes are the same. my process is similar to other friends that don't have money. So basically, like I feel that the problem we have many times is that we don't have budget enough to do all the stuff that we need to do. You know, like people listening to this interview are gonna say like, yeah, obviously, right? Like it's not the same to have like $1 billion to make something than when you have like 50,000. And of course it's not the same, but at the same time, it's kind of like sometimes we need to play with the budget a lot and like a Tetris, and that's why sometimes you also get people on board late. That's what's something that we were talking about earlier, and it's just because you kind of try to do your best with what you have right now, and if you are lucky to save a little bit of money to use it in another thing. And that's also why we don't have like maybe, you know, like the best of the best all the time. It's just because we are all the time playing with getting budgets right. And I see these similarities with some friends trying to make themselves a career path in the cinema industry. It's just the same. Like maybe they have like 2 directors, and the director also performs, and at the same time they do this and that. And this is kind of like the same in the games industry. Like in indie especially, we have one person that has 5 hats in the company. So it's kind of like the same. In other industries, I think that I didn't have the opportunity to talk much about kind of the same processes with other people.
One last question. I asked this to Ali Lowe the other day when we were speaking to him, and I just want to ask you the same thing. It's very general, but what would your advice be to people who are wanting to get into the industry and get into development?
I think the first thing that I would like to say is like take care of your health, mental and physical. That's very important. And honestly, that we've been talking about this at the beginning of the interview, that I completely lost my health when I started in the games industry, because I wanted to kind of, like be the very best at the beginning. And all things have their processes. And I think if we don't feel at our best, we are not kind of giving the best of us either. And you can see that in games as well. So that's the first thing. But then also, I don't have the recipe for, like making yourself a career in the games industry without working a lot. Because in some ways, also, when you see someone that works a lot, you can feel it, and you see it in the portfolios and all that stuff. So that's also a problem that I think we need to maybe not lower the bar, but kind of being more compassionate with the people that wants to enter the games industry. And above all, I think we need to have more respect for people that are trying to start, because many times we don't take care of the students enough, and I think that's a mistake. And then I think that people should start making their own things. It doesn't matter if they look terrible, because like whatever we make from scratch in our lives is not gonna be perfect the first time, but sometimes when you have 50 years of experience or whatever, you still make mistakes, so that doesn't matter. So I would say that the best advice is to take care of yourself, and also to make a lot of things that you feel satisfied with, preferably short experiences that you can deliver quickly out there and have received the feedback, so it keeps you motivated.
That's fantastic. That's wonderful. And to come, I guess, finally onto what you're talking about at Playway. So you have a session with Ali, and you're going to be looking at games and empathy. So can you tell us a little bit more about it, what you're going to be touching on, and does empathy differ from emotion, or what is it that we're going to hear from you?
Basically, I'm gonna speak about how we should be empathetic with the users and like the players, when I don't like the word user, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. When we make games, in the sense of like, we need to kind of open ourselves to create and, like give the best of us out there. And also it's gonna be kind of like a talk on how do we find that voice as a professional as well, and to be empathetic with ourselves and kind, and kind of like grow the best we can, and to kind of translate that into the games we make as well.
That's fantastic. And can you tell our lovely listeners where they can find you and find your games online, Marina?
Yes, so you can find me on Twitter. It's nympha_dp, and also I'm on itch with nympha.itch.io. And you on Twitter you can find myself and my website and everything.
Fantastic. And we'll provide all the links across the whole of the Scottish Games Network. And we're really looking forward to the Playway, and we will be there cheering virtually in the front row when you and Ali are speaking. So, Marina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a genuine pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.